I've read almost 60 books so far this year, and I have just read a book that could potentially go all the way and be my best book of 2025. Natasha Brown, Sayaka Murata, Han Kang, Ali Smith, Emma McBride. These are some of the brilliant authors that I have read new books from this year. But it is Tori Peters' Stag Dance that I think is the best. And I was expecting it to be good. I was expecting it to be brilliant, but I wasn't expecting it to be quite this spectacular. Sophomore books often disappoint, but certainly not this one. Sometimes the really great books take these really big risks. They're successful at doing something they have no right to do. But Stag Dance is different. It is simply a good book telling entertaining stories with thoughtful character creation, but doing everything so well and having such a strong, amazing voice, or in this case, 4 different strong, amazing voices, that it elevates itself to something special. Stag Dance is a collection of 4 novellas that are all very different. They're quite unique, but all dealing with different aspects of being a trans woman. Beginning with Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones, a speculative dystopian story where trans women are at fault for a contagion ruining the world. It focuses on T4T, which I will simply summarize as trans friendship, but it is slightly larger than that. The Chaser is a young adult tragic romance in which a seemingly straight guy finds another guy pretty and has confusing feelings about that. The pretty guy in question, while being labelled a boy, very clearly doesn't see themselves as one. The titular novel Stag Dance follows an illegal all-male lumberjacking operation in which a dance to let off steam will soon be had, and some of the men can wear triangular segments of cloth over their groin to indicate that they wish to play the role of a woman. It is told in this very rugged, sophisticated elocution that we're so accustomed to seeing in southern novels, the tough common man, the erudite redneck, and it is quite addictive. The Masker is about a toxic relationship between a trans woman and somebody who wears a mask, and a toxic relationship between a trans woman and an older trans woman. Choices are made and friendships are tested in this messy girl novella. We have a speculative, a young adult, an old school literary fiction with just a hint of horror, and a messy girl novella. 4 very different stories. And when collections like this, or even just short stories, are published, I often feel that the challenge for an author is how do they make the collection cohesive while still having individual standalone stories. And primarily, Peters has focused on giving you 4 unique, captivating and breathtaking experiences, but there are connecting themes. Some seem random, such as pigs appearing in all of the parts of this book, and weirdly that kind of works. It doesn't feel forced for something that could be quite random, although I'm still kind of wondering why. But there are other themes that are just a little bit more obvious. If you put a minimum of 1 trans girl into every novella, there's going to be something for you to come back to. There's something for you to compare. But within the trans girl experience, there is such large range explored in these novellas. For example, we have elder trans women and younger trans women, and that term can both be applied to their age from birth and their age since realizing that they were in fact a woman. There is the role of sex, love and attraction in the lives of trans women, and how that is complicated by their desire for gender euphoria. The roles of trans sisterhood is something across at least 3 of these stories, and is something that is presented in very different ways in each. Trans friendship is complex in this book, and it is not just the usual complex female friendship, but it has the added complexity of things like, well, if I'm out with her and she gets clocked, does that mean I'm more likely to be clocked? But then also, how many other people in this world, in my life, know what I have been through? The novellas are linked in another way. What we learn from the babe, the protagonist from Stag Dance, we can apply to the next tale, The Masker. As I was reading this, I thought it was a little weird not to have Stag Dance, which is undoubtedly the best novella of the collection, hidden away in the middle. But the order that you read these stories in impacts your experience. Peters is holding your hands, while she is definitely writing this for trans audiences. It is so accessible to cis allies, and this is probably just Peters acknowledging that different trans people are at different points and know different things, and that is certainly a theme of the collection, just to be very meta. But while this is written in part to educate young trans people and part to empathise with older trans people, making them feel seen, Peters' inclusive style makes it very easy for cis people like myself to put ourselves in the position that these characters are in. It makes it so powerful. I've already complimented Tori Peters' creation of unique voices for all of these stories, and that is reflected in her characters. Peters is able to communicate their motivations, fears and desires through their thoughts, experiences and action. And this is true not only of the protagonists of the novellas, but of all the major players. Being able to capture the voice of these very different characters really shows off Peters' range as a writer. But it is in the setting she creates that drives home the massive differences in these stories. A bleak, transphobic future, a claustrophobic boarding school, an isolated lumberjack camp, and a chaotic modern trans party scene. If you want to know how to write different genres, you have the Tori Peters method right there. Voice, character, setting. Create these while being mindful of your prose, and the genre will flow. Breathtaking prose is not always appropriate to your writing. Prose that interacts and strengthens the other traits of the literature. That is what good prose is, and that is what Peters has done. This leaves us with the final element, the plot. And a good plot doesn't need to be complex with twists and turns. What it needs to do is to provide the tension to keep us interested. It needs to stretch the characters so that it can reveal something about them. It needs to explore the themes. But when Peters does produce something a little bit more complex, it creates the best novella of the lot, the Ticklicher Stag Dance. Yeah, sure, she has given herself the most pages with that novella to create something, but this story is so good that it would be the best thing I've read this year. Standalone or part of this collection, it makes no difference. Stage Dance centres on Babe, a giant of a human, capable of feats of extreme strength. Among the colony of lumberjacks, a group not exactly renowned for being scrawny, the Babe is the strongest and the largest human. The Babe is also uncommonly ugly, or at least that's what they say about themselves. So when the idea of a dance is presented and the opportunity of being a girl for the night is put forward, this ugliness and size is a barrier to the Babe pinning the fabric vagina to their groin and being courted. And I kind of really got this from a bizarre angle. I myself am 6'4". I am accustomed to being the largest person in the room. I am also usually by default the strongest. And with this, the pressure to prove my masculinity doesn't often exist, but there is an expectation that if there is some heavy lifting to do, that I will be doing it. There is that assumption. My size dictates the role that I have. And on the odd occasion when I have hurt my back, there is sort of a shame that I can't fulfill that role. The expectation of masculinity with size means that if you were coming to terms with a trans femme identity, it really would be a barrier that you would face. As too would ugliness. If I ask you to visualize a woman, I guarantee you've given her a pretty face. One of the things I loved about this story was not just the bodily gender dysphoria being explored, but also we don't know how Babe identifies. There's clearly something genderqueer going on, but for a lot of this book, we don't know where Babe falls into that spectrum. And as the other various parts of the plot begin to heat up and get resolved, we're with the Babe when they realise who they are. And that's really, really cool. And on that sort of topic, what I found weird and very intriguing is because that the illegal lumberjacking operation was a closed group or an all-male operation, I couldn't tell if the trans aspect of some of the characters was the role that they were playing in this environment or something more permanent. Was this simply a temporary role or a catalyst for self-discovery, which in turn is exploring the ideas of gender fluidity and arguing that you can identify as male and later identify as female, and that's super valid, and I couldn't agree with Peters more on that. Trans friendship / rivalry, it's pretty complicated, is explored in this novella too. I enjoyed all 4 novellas, and while I've made no secret that Stag Dance was my favourite, I also loved The Chaser almost as much. Set in a boarding school, it follows one boy as he is made to share a room with a boy he finds particularly pretty, but doesn't understand why. This relationship pretty quickly turns sexual in a very one-sided fashion, and that is not of our protagonist's making, even though he benefits more from this arrangement. And this is the only story in the collection where the trans character is not the protagonist of the story. The central theme of this novella is homophobia or internalized homophobia. The protagonist never sees his conquest as a trans woman, and to be fair to him, it's only said in a whisper fairly late in the story. He sees the relationship as gay. He doesn't understand it. He is attracted to women. He doesn't get a hard-on when he showers with the other boys, so he must be straight, right? And that point of view really erases both trans people and the bisexual, pansexual, sort of that area of sexuality. One of the reasons I really loved Peter's first novel, Detransition Baby, was that it got me to question my own sexuality. And this novella captures that experience. If you are straight, does that include being attracted to trans women? And if you are attracted to trans women, even if it's only 1 or 2 of them, does that make you gay, bi, straight, what? There's actual legitimate answers to this, but they're things that you need to get straight in your head. And personally, I realise that the existence of trans people made sexuality much more complex than the labels we have. Those labels don't really work. You have people you find attractive and people you don't, and there may be a pattern. But to label it almost seems silly. And to hate people or be disgusted by them for something like this, it seems so stupid. But this is not a realization our protagonist has. And he is ashamed of his relationship. He is worried about what his father will think. And that worry is quite valid. On the other side of this, the trans girl he is in a relationship with is a bit confused. This could be the story of any woman being used for sex and not for a relationship, and not being informed by the man. But the motivations for this are more complex. She uses their late night sexual encounters to gain gender validity and euphoria so that she can feel like a woman. But that doesn't mean there isn't a connection between the two of them. She is also just a girl who likes a boy who is a dickhead and can't communicate and isn't in touch with his own emotions. You're quite heavily invested in these characters. You hope our protagonist would have a moment of clarity and stand up to the societal oppression that is going to make him miserable for years and years to come if he doesn't come to terms with it. You hope our trans girl has the confidence to walk away from this shitty relationship. With these sort of horrible relationship explorations, you often ask yourself, why don't you just leave? But the answer in this is really clear. They get to surrender to who they actually are, even if it's just for a moment, even if the relationship is shit, and that's really powerful. And while this relationship is horrible, it is never actually violent. But through this, you understand why trans women are so often the victims of violence. They feel like a woman in the relationship, but then later in The Masker, this theme is explored further, but this time with violence. A trans woman getting slapped by her man feels like a woman because of it. I mean, how horrible. Hitting me makes me feel like a woman. That is a point of view that is commenting on a lot more than just trans issues right there. And even though transness is being explored in these novellas, it is also being humanized. And as a straight cis male reader, it was so easy to understand the experiences of these women and all the characters, and to often relate to them even though I'd never been through that myself. And that for me is the ultimate marker of good writing. If the author can help you empathize with their characters and their experiences, nothing else matters. It's going to be a great book. But then this book does more than just that. It is truly special and the sign of a rapidly maturing and developing rare talent of an author. If you like this video and want to support this channel, I have a Patreon you can subscribe to. But if you can't, or you just don't want to, hitting that like button and making sure you subscribe for more bookish content would make me very happy too. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.